Machines are start writing our code, so we have to survive in that area. And Vadim, a maintainer for Harbor Container Registry, will gonna explain us how to survive.
Right. Thank you very much, Roger. All right, just quick to myself. My name is Vadim Bauer. I'm the maintainer of a fairly popular open source project as part of the CNCF. It's called Harbor. I'm working on Harbor since many years and container registries for almost a decade. And yeah, if you're interested in my work, you can follow me on different channels. And I also work for a company who builds products on Harbor. Today I would like to talk with you or discuss with you I call it the wipe coding survival guide. And I want to start with sharing what we see nowadays in our project, in our CNCF project. And then we'll see what was actually the value of open source before the agentic revolution or workflows or whatever. And how is this whole agentic workflow disrupting the ecosystem of open source? And what should we change in the future and how should we adapt to that? And some coping strategies, how others are doing it, and what are the strategies we are trying to implement in our project. There are some mostly ideas, we're trying to implement them already. This is how we're going to close afterwards, right? So survival guide. So when I submitted this talk a couple of months ago, I was eager and like I was really frustrated. So like, how do you survive this stuff now? Because there's a lot of stuff coming in. And recently I came to the conclusion that survival is a bit of a problem term, right? Because it's something of a short term, right? So you're trapped on an island, you survive for a couple of weeks, someone picks you up and you're back home in your city, right? And I think this is not what's going to happen, right? So it has kind of the connotation of short term and you kind of survive or you die, right? That's not the case, right? So the case is more about adoption and not survival. So we should really embrace and adopt to the new reality. We should not survive it because survival means you either live or you die, right? So, and we should not, be in the second category. And that's why we should adopt, and also the open source project should adopt, and everyone should adopt to that. And I'm trying to, show this from the perspective of the project Harbor. So if you don't know what Harbor is a CNCF graduated project since 2022, and it's essentially a container registry with many fancy features on top, right? So it's a container registry. We're using Docker distribution underneath, and we slapped around like authentication, authorization, project management, quotas, policies, and all that stuff around the registry so that teams and organizations can use it and do some like vulnerability scanning and workflows and everything. So it's like full-featured software stack that is adopted quite well. So there's a lot of companies are using it. I think Siemens has a lot of use cases there as well. So we're pretty much in the middle of adoption. So we have not adoption, but yeah, Kubernetes on top. Then we have Helm, etc. And then somewhere is Harbor in the middle between Envoy and Cilium, which is Cilium is a pretty popular tool as well. So we're somewhere there. So how does the reality look in the project nowadays, right? I'm going to give you some screenshots, and this looks like a fairly normal pull request overview. And what you don't see, so what you don't see, maybe you see it, there is some indicator here, there is a pill which indicates what contribution it is. This is kind of a new feature of GitHub, which is very interesting, or which helps a lot. And it says first time contributors. First time, contributor, first time, bot, right? So you see that bots are in the minority here, right? So like the majority are first time contributors. So the time frame is 1 hour, 4 hour, yesterday, 2 days, 3 days. So you see there's like 2-3 PRs 2-3 PRs per day. Same goes for, this is another project, Harbor CLI. This is a project with issues. You can see there's like a bug, a PR, a bug, a PR, a bug, PR, like, and all following the same structure, all designs. You see there's a lot of people automating their work. And on another project, the same flow, first time, the whole list, the whole last week. And issues, the same thing. This is the main project, Harbor. You see there's not even feedback, like just a dump of PR, like from one person. So you can see there's a lot of PRs and issues generated with AI, and we are still the same people, right? We're still the same maintainers. We didn't automate ourselves yet. There's still someone needing to review this. And you can also see it in the stats. So there's the Linux Foundation has a dashboard called LFX dashboard, LFX stats or something it's called. And then you can see for each project how the stats are showing up. And then you can see this is just from the last 365 days, which is already higher than the years before. And you see that the PRs are growing, the pull requests are growing, and also the issue resolution is going down because nobody is taking up the issues or it's not enough. And this is what I've observed personally from, let's say, in the last couple of months. So back in the day, we started with 1 or 2 issues per day max. Nothing on Sunday, nothing on Saturday, mostly on Monday to Friday. Now we're at like 5 to 10 issues per day. 1 or 2 external PRs. External PRs means people who are contributing, like first-time contributions or contributors that are not regularly contributing. They're just kind of a one-off contributions. We had this maybe once or twice per month. This is now once, twice per day. On Sundays, Saturdays as well. We had pretty shallow influx of vulnerability reports. So basically, people are reporting vulnerabilities that they disclose with us in a private channel, which is back in the day, it was mostly done by research agencies or research facilities, because a lot of users who are using Harbor are large organizations and they run vulnerability tests and vulnerability scans and code analysis on the software stack before they're trying to use this. And so we had maybe like 1 to 5 vulnerability disclosures per year. So really, number that you can cope with. And now we had like 1 to 5 per week. And they're really big reports. It's not something that you can just look at it and say, yeah, okay, it's maybe AI generated. It's AI generated because everyone is doing it. But the difference is like, you need to qualify it, right? Is it legit AI generated or is it not legit? So it's a lot of work. And that's really difficult to distinguish signal versus noise, because we are all using AI now. We're also ourselves using AI to cope with it. But the amount is higher than the AI is helping us, right? And because there is so much content generated through the AI, all the PRs are more or less looking good, the issues are looking good, and everything looks legit. So it needs a lot of effort to look into that. And if you point your agent to that and say like, hey, look at it, does it sound legit? You know the answer, yes, of course it's legit. There's a really, man, So there's a lot of things coming influx, and to be honest, we don't know how to cope with that really. So there's some different strategies how people are coping with it, but there is a more fundamental things beneath it, right? That really affects how the open source ecosystem is working, and that leads us to look at the value proposition of open source. So why is open source, or why is open source so popular? What made it so attractive to businesses, to people, to contributors? And so what is the value of open source? And there's like 5-6 points, and I'm just pointing out 4 that I think are the most critical ones. And yeah, the most important one is this shared engineering economics, right? So you put a lot of developers together, they hack on some code, they build a project, and this project gets released, and people are starting contributing, they start coding it. And so this is how you share the economics. So you contribute something, someone else contributing, you get more value out of for yourself. So the cost played a lot of it, and also the engineering power, right? So you could build a project with little engineering effort by putting just one engineer on the project, and then it became something like Linux kernel or Kubernetes. Then the distribution and adoption, right? So you could give away software for free or give away software to someone, and they can just use it, install it, and then by the time the CFO or some business people get hold of it, they realize this stuff is running already in production, right? So you don't need to have this full sales cycle and adopt the software. So it's really easy to adopt software in the open source space. And also the trust and transparency and the community, right? So the community was a really important part of the whole ecosystem because it was driving the project, it was reporting issues and all that stuff. So not every point is equally heavy here, right? So there's like all valid points, but I think not all points are really put that much weight. And I think a lot of weight was happening here on the shared engineering economics. So I think you could get away with a shitty community, right? So a lot of community projects prove that it's working, right? So you could get away with shitty community, you get with trusty and less trustworthy economics like NPM, right? Like how can you do this? But it's working, right? So you could get away with a lot of these things, yeah. You could really get a lot of with these things, but you could not get away without this one here, right? So this was the main cornerstone of the open source ecosystem. And now that code is free or code generation is easy and cheap, right? We have a disbalance in the open source, and I think we need to think about what should be the future of open source. So where should be the whole things coming together back in the open source part. Like, so I think one part is that we are moving out from the authorship, like developers building code, open sourcing the code, and this is the project, right? So I think we should move from authorship into maintainership. So we should focus more on the other pillars, make the other pillars stronger, so that the whole thing doesn't tip or fall over. So the maintainership is the one that should be more embraced and become more important in the whole project ecosystem. So the write capacity, I think this is currently the fundamental problem, right? So the write capacity is infinitely larger than the review capacity, right? So you need someone to review the whole stuff, right? And this is a huge constraint nowadays. So and some people argue, so we need to move up the stack. So we need to treat the free labor and free distribution to something like a neutral substrate, to provenance and governance, so something that you cannot easily regenerate. And this is something that this whole like the CNCF and the Eclipse foundations, they promote this as a point where open source should be and what they see as a strength, but I'm not buying it yet. But what I really think is that like trust, curation, and human judgment will be a crucial part of the whole part, right? So I think this is gonna be more important than ever, and the other part is like when code is there in abundance, right? Forking becomes trivial, right? And Steve Yeager is a proponent in this software engineering, agentic software engineering space. He's like quoting it really nicely, because like what was like a declaration of war if you forked a project is now a common thing, right? So it should be becoming the new standard, right? And as I said, like the whole stewardship problem, like promoting, I think I have really a big problem with, because on one hand it's true, right? So like things like trust, transparency, and also the longevity, right? Because a lot of the projects, you probably heard it, right? So a lot of the projects on GitHub, because GitHub is are unstable, and it's unstable because there are so many people committing stuff to GitHub, right? There's like millions of projects every month starting new, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on, and how do you know the project will survive the next few months, right, or the few years, right? So you need to have some trust, and you need to build this trust over time. So, and this is something that need to happen, or that will play a more important role than nowadays. And I think that this is something like the Linux Foundation, the Cloud Native Foundation, and Eclipse and other foundations are promoting. I'm not sure if this is the right things to do. I mean, it's definitely helping, but it's also difficult to get in there, right? So if there's millions of projects, why should they take every project, right? So there's like, I think there need to be other steps into that. So what are the coping strategies in here, right? And I'm looking also for us, for our project, and also I'm looking what others are doing. And there's really a lot of different ways how this is done, right? So I think the most obvious one is to just ban all AI PRs. So it's like no AI PRs, we're not allowing this, and this is certainly a solution for short term maybe, but I don't think it's a long-term solution, because you can disguise PRs, AI PRs, and all that stuff. So you can still get PRs. You need to expose AI-generated PRs. Yeah, why? Because people will do it anyway, right? So why? Yeah, you're not writing which IDE you're using, right? Or it's nobody cares, right? Because like you could argue that one age or one model is superior than the other model, which is true, right? But if I write a PR or write a PR with an agent, that's going to be significantly different from a PR that is written by a first-time contributor, because the knowledge and the background is completely different one. So the output, even if you're using a different model or whatever, it doesn't make any difference at the end of the day. So if you're using, like, let's say the top 10 models or whatever, it doesn't make any difference what model you're using, because it depends a lot on the person who is prompting it and who's writing it and who's pushing it forward. And some projects are disabling PRs, which I find quite interesting, like disabling PR, because it saves you a lot of headache. It's a legit point, and I think it's not that bad. I will go into that more a bit later. And then ignoring. So this is what the majority of the projects are doing, right? So, and this is what we also in the project are doing mostly. We just ignore, like yeah, what should we do? It's like, yeah, it's there, right? So, but then people are trying to create guidelines and rules, like banning, like Hashimoto. He's writing a lot about rules and guidelines about how, so the creator of Ghosty and Terraform. So he's writing about guidelines and rules and how they try in their project to ban bad actors from submitting PRs. And I think like submitting bad PRs. So what is a bad PR, right? So this is really a kind of a personal decision. What is a bad PR? Because for me it might be bad, for you it might be okay, right? And so it's really difficult to judge on guidelines and rules. They're still useful, they're still needed, but I think there need to be more to that. So this is a bit of more of some ideas on what we should do instead. Yeah, I think guidelines and rules for humans and AI are a crucial part. And one other crucial part is the knowledge transfer, and I'll go into that a bit more. So the other part is closing the loop. Like Peter Steinbeck told it, closing the loop means you're giving the agent something to do, it will do it, then you test it or have a test that verify it, and then you're closing the loop, and then you iterate loop-wise like a iterative approach on making the things work. And I think we need to do this testing on a low level. Low level is unit tests, and I also consider integration tests to be also low level in this context, because we need to do it also on a higher level test. So we need to verify PRs and contributions towards the roadmap. We need to verify the PRs towards the project scope. Is it even in the scope of the project? Is it usable in this project? Is anyone else is using that? Because there's a lot of PRs coming in from big names, and they're the only users there, right? So we have some PRs in our project that I know one company is using it, and they're big PRs, or big features that are there for many years. But I know there's just one company using it, because every time something is broken there's just one person from this company is reporting that, and nobody else. So, and you know that this means that the thing is never used by someone else, and it's there in the project, and we have it forever, right? And so this means a clear roadmap, what we expect in the project and how we expect the project to evolve in which direction, because this also clears the guideline and also reduces the amount of PRs that you are getting in. Because if you say it's not on our roadmap, and if you tell the agent, look, this is our roadmap, and if it's not on the roadmap, we don't want this PR. It also reduces you the amount of PRs you will get in. And then the clear and narrow project scope is also one important part. So I think it makes also sense to start splitting up projects in sub-projects and thinking like, this is our main project, and this is our sub-project, or this is our side project, whatever you call it, and let people contribute to that and evolve into that, so that your main project and your main critical path stays unchanged or stays stable. I think this should, because I think back in the day, it was a bit more difficult to spin up a new project, to establish a new project, because it took a lot of effort, like the whole pipeline stuff, the workflows and all this stuff. And nowadays it's much easier. So I think we should embrace this more, like splitting up a project into smaller pieces where things are working together or complement each other. And we need to, this is like more of a, for the developers in us, is about really think about maintainer completely different. So a maintainer should not be, or is not, the person who is writing code. So the maintainer should not be, or should not only be, a code writer. So a maintainer should take on more responsibility. And we should be able to do a knowledge transfer. So knowledge transfer from how we do things in our project. So like, what are the rules and guidelines is like one of the things, but how we approach problems, how we do all the stuff that is not codified. And this is something that reminded me from my time when I was studying, is like knowledge transfer or knowledge management systems. And they're talking about these different types of knowledges. And I think it's really fitting here as well, because there's like a different type of knowledge. You've probably maybe seen it somewhere somehow. And there's like different types of knowledge that you can have. One is the explicit knowledge that you can codify. You have document, databases, manuals, procedures. You can do trainings, and this is like something that you can do easily with AI. You can codify it. There is an implicit knowledge, right? So you have knowledge how through experience, and often difficult to articulate, the observation, experience, mentorship. This is something where in the knowledge management system you can transfer this implicit knowledge into explicit knowledge. There is a transfer here, and there's a third part which becomes a bit difficult. And here I think we're really in the AI space, like in the AI scope. So the AI is able to do this part here, or able to do this transfer with the human. And I think this here becomes a bit more difficult to codify, right? And I think this is something that requires us to rethink this maintainer role a bit, right? So because we need to do this part from a human to human, and we should onboard more people so they can take on the responsibility here and kind of do this part here. And I think this is something that AI will not be able to replace sooner or later, because this is like and this is where this knowledge transfer need to happen. So the knowledge transfer need to be happening, of course, here, right? So that we can codify stuff for the AI, so they can follow the guidelines and rules. But we will also need to make this part usable, and this is like a human-to-human interaction. And this leads me to the challenges that we will have with this approach. And I think this is like I know it for myself as well. And most developers, they want what? They want to develop, right? They want to write code. And communication and collaboration is a key competency of developers, as you know, right? It is a really tough for a lot of developers, right? So I think we have to be honest about this one. So you're probably not in, you who are here are not part of this group, but in general, if I look in the industry and like my 25 years of experience, I know that a lot of developers are focusing more on that one. And even though I like this one as well, yeah, we need to focus on other key competencies. We need to focus on the communication and communication skill, because this also opens up communication skills toward the agents, because we are communicating also with the agents. Pretty much the same way that we should also communicate, not pretty much the same way, but we are communicating to agents, and we also should communicate to other humans so that we can onboard them in our projects. And I think we will not be able to cope with this influx of PRs and issues if we cannot communicate and onboard other maintainers easier and much faster. And I think there's a lot of open source projects have the maintainer problem, right? Because a lot of open source projects complain that they get maintainers, but it's easy to onboard maintainers for long term. And maybe I don't know, but maybe we need a new generation of maintainers and developers. Maybe this is something that we just need to wait until those people pop up, because there's a new generation and people with a different mindset that can take on the role. Because I think currently this is a challenge in this open source ecosystem. So what are we doing in our project in Harbor? And we've been thinking about this for months, if not already more than a year. So how can we change what we are doing to be able to cope with this new reality? And I think what we're currently doing is mostly ignoring it, right? So this is what we're doing. Of course, the easiest part is creating rules and guidelines. So what type of code do we want? How should it look like? So on this knowledge management part, we are mostly on the codifying part here, right? So we're just really codifying authorship. So we're trying to do here as well to at least get better inputs, right? So we're not decreasing the amount of PRs, but at least we're getting better PRs, which is also good, and also better issues. We trying to enforce the rules, right? So we have agents, or we're trying to build agents who can enforce those rules, who can analyze the PRs, the issues, and enforce the rules, and like automate a lot of workflows. There's a lot of like the most obvious stuff, right, that you can do is probably here. And if we go a bit beyond that one, like what do we want to do on the contribution side? Yeah, and there is a really famous quote from I think it's Cervantes, and Goethe used it, show me who your friends are and I tell you who you are, right? And I think we should also embrace this in the code, like show me your prompt and I'll tell you who you are, because this is really true. Like you cannot judge by the output what was the input, but if you look in the input, you can already judge the output, right? So, and I think this is really important part, and I am like encourage and address contributors and ask them like, hey, I like your contributions, or I like the idea what you're doing. I didn't read your code, I don't care, but show me the prompt, because then we can start a discussion and we can see together, is it making sense at all what you're trying to do, right? Because it sounds interesting, but I'm doubting that what you're trying to do is the right thing to do. Show me your prompt. And I think this is something that we should do more. And the other part is, and I think here, maybe I'm a bit alone on that, but I think we don't need PRs in open source anymore. Because we as maintainers have the same tool as everyone else, the same frontier models. I have them all, right? So I have Codex, I have OpenCloud, I have Cloud Code, Codex, Gemini. I have all three models, right? So I'm using them interchangeably. I have the same tools and workflows as anyone who's contributing PR. But what I have that nobody else who is contributing have, I have the knowledge of the project. I have the knowledge how things should be done. I can codify some of it, but I cannot codify everything out of it. And that's why it's important to not let people create PRs and more discussing about what they're trying to achieve. Like, what is the business requirements? You know, what is your business doing? And then also, because we don't want to avoid creating PRs or features for every user in our project, you know, because if you imagine like we have 100,000 of users, like if we have PRs for every user, then we have 100,000 PRs, so 100,000 features, every one individual PR. So we need to find a consensus. So what, like, engage the community to see like, hey, does this PR make sense, or does this feature make sense for everyone? Or is it this feature only making sense for you or for this organization? So we need to get more people in deciding more on what makes the PR. Yeah, and this is something where we should be from the contributor side. The other part is like we should, I think, treat contributors more as a maintainers, right? So we should, I'm not sure how we can do this, but this is like my thinking here. So we should equip them with the knowledge as a maintainer, and to a certain extent they will produce better input, like this can be a PR, a bug fix PR, an issue, and then we can also delegate the work to those contributors. So if you contributed to the PR, you're now responsible for the PR, right? So you're responsible for it forever, right? And I think this is something that we should also do in our project. We should make our project easy to fork. And I say this as a kind of a accepting the reality, is we should make our project easy to fork, that others can fork the project, build the feature they need, and maybe live with this feature, right? And maybe this feature will come back in, maybe not. And I think this will also kind of relieve a lot of the pressure from the project itself, because people will be responsible for their fork and they will continue using the fork. And like, yeah. And this means like easier local testing and this stuff. And this also means we need to change our software. So we need to change how we're, not only how we build our software, but how we architect our software. And there are some areas where we should change our software. Like, I mean, this is like no-brainer, like make software easier to maintain is like the goal of the whole architecture, right? But the point is that we need to really do this, right? So it's like this time now, right? So I think we should really kind of make this more effort into that. I mean, we of course we put more effort, but there's always other things, and we should really, like, we should build more extension points in the software. So because we want to avoid more PRs, we need to build more extension points, and more extension points means people can build extensions that are in our software or interact with our software without needing to create a PR, right? So change our software to provide more extension points, and then some back channel. So when something goes wrong, we have some metrics and usage, how people are using the features, and this whole part should be then, of course, behind feature flags so that you can enable and disable features. Of course, I think one other issue in our project is we need to reduce the attack surface, right? So we are using a lot of tools in our projects that accumulated over the 10 years lifespan of the project, Node, NPM specifically. We need to get rid of a lot of those dependencies, because they are really exposing, exponentially making our attack surface bigger. And this is also from the trust and security and perspective of the project problematic. And that's we need also to change. Another thing is feature flags. I think feature flags is really important part, because this allows us to cope with the PRs a bit better, right? Because if we have feature flags, we are able to release potential unstable features. We can just hide them between feature flags and say like, hey, this feature is there. It's behind the feature flags. It might be unstable. It's a sandbox, right? And give it to the users and let them test it, right? Because we can use the users as testers. And I think this is really where we need to be, because then we can leverage the community, not only for input, but also we can leverage the community for testing. And I think this is something that will not reduce the amount of PRs, but accelerate the acceptance of PRs and allow people to provide more feedback about the functionality, and also use the user feedback to loop into agentic workflows, so the agentic workflows can then resolve the issues, right? So this will also kind of reduce the pressure from the maintainers. And then this also allows us to provide a stable core. And I think a lot of software projects, especially in our is the use case, right? So there's a kind of a critical path in our software that should always work, which is images push and pull, user login, robot account login and should work. So this is the critical path. This should always work, right? So this is like, if this is not working, then it's bad, really bad. But other parts, like if the vulnerability scanning not work and the result is not there, yeah, it's no problem if it can be fixed tomorrow, right? Or in a way. So we need to be more cautious about what is the stable core, what should never change, and what can change and evolve, right? And then we should protect the stable part and be flexible on the other part. Then of course the maintainer onboarding and mentorship subcomponents, like so delegate maintainership to subcomponents, delegate mentorship to people who contribute to PR. So if we would be able to say like, you contribute to the PR, we accept it, but now you're responsible for that forever, right? And if you don't support it, we just disable it. It's up to you, right? So I think if we will be able to do that, people will be more cautious of contributing PR and contributing or making this commitment, right? Because they would think like, hey, man, maybe I don't need that much, right? Yeah, that's really true. That's happened a lot, right? Because there's a lot of feature suggests, coming in, and it's like, yeah, that's a good feature, you like to contribute. I mean, back in the day, you like to contribute? Nah, it's not so important, right? So, I mean, now they would say yes, but back in the day, it was a bit a test if they really committed to that. So these are the efforts we are trying to achieve with our project, and I think we're not there yet. We're far away from all that. So we are really on the first step now with the guidings and rules and guidelines. And I think we need to be more we need to get down with the PRs. So we need to get down with the PRs. We need to get down with the contributions, and we cannot do that otherwise, because we're not getting maintainers. They don't pop up, So we need to get them. We need people to become maintainers on one hand, yes, but this will not reduce the amount of PRs and issues that we get. So they will maybe reduce it a bit, but they will not be able to cope with that. And so we need to find other strategies to cope with the problem. And yeah, I don't have a solution, and I think nobody has a solution at the moment, because there's a lot of things, like there's a lot of things in uncertainty, and everyone claims they found the holy grail here. But I think that the reality is that nobody has a clue, and everyone is trying out to see where the things going, which direction, and what does fit and what does not fit. And yeah, on that I would like to end, and thank you very, very much for your attention. And we have time for questions, right?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for this really great talk. So thanks for trying to tackle this topic. A lot of thoughts, but one is probably the most important for me is you say making forks very easy. Now, being in the industry for a couple of years, one thing we try to spread all the time is upstream first, and try to get away with, get rid of this nightmare that everyone is running his own code here in this company. So any thoughts on that, how we could live with that, with this conflict?
I think on one hand, you're absolutely right. So we should avoid forks, right? And I think we should make it attractive for people to contribute upstream versus forking. But at the current rate that we are in, I think the best solution is to allow or to embrace people to fork, and maybe one time to turn back, because I think if we try to not allow it, I mean, people will fork it anyway, right? If they're frustrated, if their PR is not getting merged, there's no feedback. I think we should be openly with that and say like, hey, fork it, and maybe one day it will come back, maybe not, you know. Yeah, I think because code is easy, right? And I think you need to prove the stability, and you need to prove that maintaining a fork is more work than trying to put the effort into upstreaming it. So yeah.
You're referring to your title. I think you said we have to change to adopt, but I think we have to do both. We have to survive this first wave, because right now, sort of like there's AI submitting issues. I just had a look at, so I'm from the Apache Software Foundation, and we're currently struggling really hard. And maybe for a little perspective, I just had a look just right now on the Apache Airflow project. They got 7 pull requests within the last hour. And that's sort of like the volume we're currently fighting with. And we're having the problem that it seems like at Apache, at least, it's this way that contributors are getting older and older in average, because it seems like Gen Z is not quite as willing to get their hands dirty and participating in open source. So we're trying to figure out a way how the ASF can keep those maintainers who are currently fighting to keep afloat, and to adopt for a time after that. So what are your thoughts on this sort of like thing?
I mean,
sorry.
you're describing the reality, and I don't know. So I don't know how we can. I mean, how we can cope with that. I think we need to change like I think the fundamental part is like we need to change the perceptive open source, like what is the value of open source. And I think the value should be like the one problem is the forking part, right? So like we have this sprawl, we have millions of new projects, so there's really loosely coupled. And I think we want to bring this together. This is like what the foundation do. They try to bring things together, right? And I think we need to find some different ways. I don't know. I really don't know.
Would have loved to learn.
Kind of to piggyback on that, thank you, wonderful talk and very thought-provoking. To piggyback on that, what do you see as the process for onboarding new maintainers? Whereas it would traditionally be, I make some contributions to a project, and through those contributions, I build trust with the maintainer team. If there's less contributing going on, if there's less PRs, what do you see as like kind of the onboarding process or the process of building trust with new maintainers that we need so desperately?
I think for me, the obvious idea is divide and conquer, right? Like breaking down a big project in smaller part, so you can delegate maintainership to different people and try to build those people up a bit. And the other part is like, I think also one part is like really onboard the users as contributors more. Like really let the users test, let them be easy to test the software. Like when they deploy the software, this feature is already there. They need to enable it, right? So basically, it becomes much easier to make the step from the user to a contributor, because if you're using a feature and it doesn't work, you get a stack trace. You go and you paste the stack trace and say it doesn't work, right? So this is already something that we need to make it much easier to become maintainer from a user contributor as a maintainer. I think that's what I think we should be doing more, or help in this way.
Interesting talk, thank you. To me, it seems like you are treating, or we are treating PRs like a to-do list. And maybe it's time to treat it like an all-you-can-eat buffet, where you cannot eat everything.
Yeah.
Do you have some thoughts on that? Maybe a voting system or any ideas?
You're absolutely right. Like we cannot accept everything, right? So voting system is an interesting point, right? As I mentioned it briefly, right? We need to get in the community, the users, right? The feedback. What do they think about this? Does it make sense from the business perspective? And then we can think about the architectural part. How does it fit in the scope and everything? And yeah, so, and the other part is maybe forking. As I think we're still turning to this part where forking becomes the less evil part. Yeah. So.
Hey, again, thank you very, very much, Vadim. We will have way more time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will have way more time later on to talk at the bar or during the break about that interesting topic.